There's my unmute. Is everybody in?
Yes.
Okay, great. I can screen share unless you want to, Lisa, with the slides of what we're working on.
Whatever works for you, Myra.
Let's see. Okay, let me grab screen share and let me know if you guys can see these.
Yes, they can.
Okay, great. So I kind of brushed through these because I think we remember the agreements and our common principles, you know, partnerships in community, open to new ideas and perspectives, self-awareness as we participate. The principles are about recognizing systemic racism. You can't cure what you don't recognize. Support learning and innovation, transparency, and focus on systemic change. So that's the spirit of the mission. So strategy 3.2, what do you think needs to happen to make sure all this great stuff that we're talking about can actually hit reality? So how can we reach priority populations that are identified in South San Francisco? So let's take that one first. And let's see, expand information and support to address housing insecurity for priority populations. Priority populations were described earlier. Does everyone remember? People of color, people of low income, people with certain, I think disabilities were on that list, but it should be. And anybody who is not privileged or who is disadvantaged for things outside of their control. So who wants to start off with, how do you make these things stick? How do you make good intentions turn into policy? What are some ideas in the context of this conversation? Anybody want to start it off?
Yeah, you have the right people in the room. You have people of diverse backgrounds, perspectives, abilities, gender identities, sexualities. You really get a sense of what the community needs. And that starts with inviting the people that need to be there, not just people that can be there because they're available. So just making sure everyone has access to the information and inviting those who want to join broadly.
That's a great point. Anyone else, when we talk about implementing programs, how do we make sure that, because let's face it, when you have an issue of discrimination, there's some bad actors out there. So how do we tie that together? The bad actors and the good intentions. What's the bridge for that?
I think the trusted individuals, like for example, in the places of worship, it's important that in the promotoris program that we have, because those people already know these people and whatever their advice is seemingly more acceptable to the people who we want to reach through these programs and services.
Also,
Anyone
economic interests.
Go ahead. What's that?
Also, economic interests. Like people are always gonna have a stake in it. So if you can leverage, if someone is considered a bad actor, finding where they can contribute to benefit everyone. So like Chevron, for example, gives a lot of money to the AIDS walk every year. And they're considered, whether you agree or not, like they're environmentally harmful, as an example.
Yes, don't hesitate. I used to be with Shell Oil. So I totally understand where you're coming from with that.
I think it is their hand raised. You can just unmute yourself.
Yeah, I'm
right?
not sure if we raise our hands or we do just talk.
Oh,
Yeah,
just
I'm not
talk,
sure
because I
But
can't.
I've seen Joanne been having her hand before me, so.
Oh yeah, Joanne then.
thank you.
And I can't see all the faces and right on the
Oh.
screen, so just speak out.
Okay.
Well, you were talking about how to reach people to get the message out so that
Correct.
you can include people. And I know I'm at Magnolia Senior Center. Of course, now with the pandemic, that's closed. But people there have talked to me about, being very concerned that okay, they have a home here in South City, but their kids who are adult kids, of course, because we're seniors, really can't afford to live in South City. They are going to have to move to a place farther out, away from the Bay Area, or or move to another state. And if you want to, maybe one possibility is, once, of course, these places are open, senior centers are open, to put the word out to senior centers, asking, are your people in your community having difficulties? So that senior center would be another place to get the word out, and maybe having a group meeting there with presenting some of this information to the seniors who are really concerned about their adult children not being able to afford to live in South City. And this is, of course, with the diverse racial makeup of the senior centers too.
Great points. That's good. Lisa,
Yeah.
I'm assuming what I don't get, you're getting. So then between the two of us, right?
So I wanted to add, when we talk about ensuring that these programs and services reach the populations, I think it's going to be important to have accountability, because, all of this looks very, very important and critical when you see it in paper and written down with words, and you open up programs and you say the program is going to do certain things, but really having someone, whether it's a board, a committee, a task force that is really making sure that what is said, or the program was said to service certain populations, that they're being served, right? That they're really checking and making, accountability just of the people who are running these programs and services, that the people who are benefiting from the programs are really the ones that were in writing said to be, the ones benefiting from those.
Mhm.
So some sort of an oversight, is that what you meant, Edith?
Yes, yes, just kind of a checking, right? You will have probably ways of, like I said, in writing.
Evaluating.
Yeah, in writing, you say that this is what's going to happen. This is the program or the service we're going to provide so that we can support certain populations. And we talk about seniors, individuals with disabilities. So because there's a variation of populations that have these needs, you wouldn't just go to just one, right? Let's make sure that everybody who needs this and are in the different sections of this populations in need are being served with services. So.
Yeah, and also what Joanne has said in her suggestion, it didn't I knew that sometimes it's hard for seniors to drive at night, because for me, I'm also having a hard time driving at night. That going to the senior center to have these meetings instead of having that in a more central place will be reaching out to more. I do understand that.
Mhm. Definitely.
Yeah, because we always take into consideration having meetings later in the afternoon or at night, so that most of the people will be there. But thinking about the seniors, I just realized that in the past, when ALSOs had a senior group, they meet actually for morning coffee.
Mhm.
That's where, when we want to get to the seniors. Yeah.
Yeah, I think you guys have hit the nail on the head, because when we look at the question, how to ensure that these programs reach priority populations as opposed to just live in the land of ideas, I think you're giving some specifics on that. Is there anything else from this before we move to the next one? I want to be conscious of time.
What about nonprofits that serve these specific communities?
I didn't.
Think that, how do you get the, if you want to reach out to them through the means that are easy for these nonprofits, flyers and things like that? working through nonprofits is a way. They already serve these communities. They already know these communities. It will be easier for them to be able to provide that support. And the other thing that I wanted to add, I think it was said before, but I just want to make sure that it's emphasized, is access. For example, if you want to include families, make sure you provide childcare. So specific things that you can do to make sure that people can come to these, say that you have meetings or things like that to inform the community. There's thinking around access.
Yeah, pre-COVID days, when we have SHAPE SSF meetings, we provide childcare in the facility. So
Yeah.
that is
You know,
something
there's
that
a
we have done.
community a center too on Tamarack, which
Yeah,
is a good location and does have set up for childcare. The other thing too, I was just thinking, a lot of people get the brown bag or food. They get a food
the senior,
box.
yeah.
And this is for anybody. Maybe some information, a flyer could be put in the boxes, or, you know, work with Second Harvest, and any boxes being delivered in South San Francisco, maybe flyers could go in the produce boxes or brown bags, and that would get the word out to the community too.
Usually I know that our staff in, you know, Kelly Jo and everybody had been doing that. So, but
Oh
I'll
yeah,
remind them.
for our seniors, yes. But if you want to reach a broader population, you know, those brown boxes go to not just seniors, to many other groups.
The Meals on Wheels, we have that program, right, Mel? The Meals
Yeah,
on Wheels.
we are expanding our Meals on Wheels, but yes, absolutely, especially at the beginning of COVID, when our lines for our Second Harvest food bank pickups were just snaking through town. We absolutely did put our renter assistance flyers in all of those, and I think a number of other community resources. That was just such a great way to get the word out far and wide at the beginning.
Yeah.
So I'm sensing that we probably need to get to our next strategy, which is, so when we look at all of this, how do we ensure, because it is the Racial Social Equity Commission, how do we ensure that racial and social equity are related to each of these strategies? So we look at priority populations, or we look at underserved populations. How do we ensure that we're targeting? And maybe some of those answers mirror each other, but I just wanted to, you know, kind of get the discussion in this direction as well. So wait a minute, let's see, 3.2, okay, 4.1. Am I reading these wrong, Lisa? I don't hear Lisa.
Yeah, I think you go back one page is where we need to be. Back one slide.
Oh, this one right here?
Back one, up one, sorry.
What are the other considerations to ensure racism related to these strategies?
So I think one thing we haven't mentioned thus far is using community colleges as hubs. Because I know that when I was at community colleges as hubs and really targeting specific populations. So like, we're lucky enough to have Skyline. I live in Avalon Park, and I used to be able to segue, which is also a bike, is my bike in my wheelchair. I used to be able to segue to campus. And I was part of Trio, and I was also part of like Las Hermanas when I was in high school. So those are like targeted for Latinx people who want to do higher education. And they also they were served underrepresented, low income, and Trio especially, it's like a federally funded program. And that's just a way to really target those people, or like a bunch of different ethnicities. And also like there's really great ethnic studies programs at these community colleges. So I think using those as hubs and like trying to get the word out that way would be really beneficial, and keep in mind social and economic justice and racial justice.
You know, I'd like to follow with what Sarah just said. I think it would be important, because what we're talking about here, we're not talking about trying to fix everything in the world. So it's about South San Francisco. So if it's specific for South San Francisco, I think it would be important to study the cultures that are more prominent in South San Francisco, because culturally, sometimes people see things with the lens of your own culture, right? And we want to be racially and social, social equity. That's what we're talking about. So
Mhm.
in order to use those strategies, you really need to understand where they're coming from. And I'm
The
talking about,
sensitivities, yeah.
the needs. Some people might be more open to receive. Other cultures might feel offended if you just hand them over something instead of them kind of trying to earn it, finding ways to follow that. So I think really being very specific in South San Francisco, what cultures do we have that are in those populations of needs that we see? Because there's been a lot of reports and studies, and there's always coming up with certain ethnic groups, but do we understand how they receive or how they interpret the supports and the services and programs? I think that would be a key importance to make.
You're
sure
right,
that-
Edith. You're very
good
right
point.
that there are some groups of people who just don't, that they feel like if they ask for something, they feel like they're going to be looked down, or
And that's when the
it's not,
promotores help.
it's the
Because
stigma, yeah.
yes, the promotores will be depending on the culture, the language, the understanding each other would be very important, because that will really help with the strategies.
It is about knowing the community.
Mhm.
You can't really solve for anything if you don't know who you're dealing with, who your customer is, basically.
And the target population, yeah.
The targeted populations. And let's see, continue to leverage available land assets, public and private resources to increase housing that is affordable.
Yeah.
So
And I think the language, the translation, the language that you use, sometimes it's harder for them to understand if they're all in English.
Mhm. Yeah.
So probably providing this, either resources or meetings also in the primary language instead of interpreters, or translators.
Mhm.
That would be another good strategy, because you are doing it in their own, comfortable. Sometimes when somebody's when you have an interpreter, sometimes by the time you're understanding what they're saying to you, the conversation moved on and you don't have even the time to raise your hand and ask a question because everything moved on. So if it's in
Yeah.
your own language, it will be helpful.
So when you apply a racial and social lens to things, what you're generally doing is looking for barriers. So, what you want to do is kind of surface, well, what's preventing things? Like you talked about language, you talked about culture. Are there some other things that might be barriers that are so baked in, we don't see them anymore? We're so accustomed to the barriers, we think it's normal. So are there any things like that we're not maybe focusing on yet?
Yeah,
Accessibility.
transportation.
Yeah, accessibility of
Ex-
the meeting place, yeah.
Like the fact that a lot of people don't drive or
Mhm.
can't drive.
I didn't hear accessibility of what?
Of the meeting place, like Flora said, the fact that a lot of people, especially around here, or seniors, can't drive, or disabled people who also can't drive, making sure that any meeting place, that's like kind of what's nice about Zoom, is you don't have to go anywhere. You can just like attend a meeting if you have access to the internet or a smartphone with cellular service. I think that's huge.
Like, for example, our COVID vaccination, it is, we're doing it in the place where they are. So because drive-through won't work for people who don't have their own vehicles.
That's a good example of getting into the community. And it happened that a friend of mine, we walk every Friday, and we were approached by two very nice young people who were handing out flyers about the vaccination program that was done at the parking lot on Linden and Lux. And my friend said, well, we already been vaccinated. We're seniors, et cetera. So I took one, I had one in my hand, went around the corner on Grand Avenue, and this gentleman was sitting on a bench there. And he looked to be older